This next part of the video is about Newton's laws, forces, and acceleration.
Right now, the GoPro has potential gravitational energy. Now it has kinetic. In midair, it had kinetic energy.
Gravity is a force that acts on all objects, and it pulls objects toward the earth. An example of gravity is me jumping off this curb, and I'm getting pulled down.
Can you tell us how gravity affects the rider? Okay. One example of how gravity affects the rider on the roller coaster is when the rider is at the top of the hill and gravity pulls it back down towards Earth.
Fluid friction affects the rider on the roller coaster by having more air resistance.
This image shows the centrifugal force and the centripetal force. These forces act as a rider goes around a loop in a roller coaster. The centrifugal force acts on the outside of the roller coaster. The centripetal force, pedal force, acts on the inside, like a bike would be pedaling around the outside.
A normal force is a force that acts against gravity. Normal force affects the rider because it keeps the rider on the track.
One area where potential energy goes to kinetic energy is when on the second loop, after it goes down the first hill and comes back up, it's at the next top of the hill. That's how it's converted there. And the rider can also go from kinetic energy to potential energy by it being at the top of the hill and going down. Kinetic energy turns to heat energy because of friction on the roller coaster. The tracks and the wheels like frictionate, so it creates heat. State Newton's first law.
Newton's first law is an object in motion stays in motion, or an object at rest stays at rest unless an outside force acts upon it.
What's that called?
That is called inertia.
Okay. Definition of inertia.
Inertia is when an object is moving in one direction and keeps moving that direction although it has tried to be stopped.
Okay. Describe how the law of inertia applies to the rider before the ride starts.
Before the ride starts, the rider wants to stay in the same position, but as the rider starts the ride, it is pulled in the direction the ride is going.
And describe how the law of inertia applies to the rider at the end of the ride.
At the end of the rider comes to an abrupt stop, making the rider fly forward because the motion in the body is still moving. State Newton's second law.
Newton's second law is mass times acceleration to find the amount of energy in an object.
How does the increasing amount of force affect the motion of the rider?
The increasing amount of force affects the rider because the amount of force can either speed up or slow down the rider as it goes throughout the ride.
How would the motion of your rider change if mass was larger?
The mass would not change because we have an example right here. I have a rock and I have a hanger, and if we drop them at the same time from the same height, they both hit at the same time, and so that's an example of why mass doesn't matter.
How can you increase the acceleration of your rider throughout the ride?
You can increase the amount of acceleration in the rider by either changing directions or speeding up or slowing down throughout the ride by increasing the slopes or decreasing the slopes.
You're good.
Yeah, thank you.
That's boss.
State Newton's third law.
Newton's third law states.
En voz alta.
Newton's third law states, for every action there must be an opposite and equal reaction.
Describe two pairs of opposing forces and how they cause the action and reaction on your rider.
So if you have a rope, right, and there's a person pulling harder, and there's a person pulling
With 10
less.
grams of force or 10 newtons of force.
Yeah.
With 10 newtons and 5 newtons.
With 10 newtons and 5 newtons, the 10 newtons will overpower, and this side will win, you could say, and this side will lose. But if you have 5 and 5 newtons, it will literally not move.
Cancel out.
They will cancel out.
Black Woody.
Positive acceleration is speeding up or changing direction. An example of positive acceleration is riding your funny board and pushing.
A place where the rider, while on the roller coaster, positively accelerates is when they're going down a big hill, like a steep slope. Can we see an example, please? Yeah, check me out. On the rider, this is a roller coaster. Go.
Negative acceleration is when a rider slows down, like this.
An example of deceleration or negative acceleration on a ride is going uphill. That's cool stuff, girl.